Hi, what's going on, guys? I'm coming to you today with a video for Armada, and we're talking about objectives. So I'm actually starting a new segment where I'm going to be covering all of the objectives and just talking about them in a little bit more depth because I've had a lot of people ask me about this, if I could kind of cover them, like what to take, when to take it, that sort of thing. So I figured I'd start off doing groups at a time. A long time ago, I had kind of done a single objective card video here and there, and it just wasn't working out, and I don't think I want to cover them like one objective at a time. I'd rather kind of cover them in groups. So I figured I'd start with colors, but I didn't want to jump straight into the Corellian conflict ones. I wanted to basically start with the original ones, because this will apply to everybody who gets the core set. So I'm starting with a basic red. These are the 4 red objectives that are going to come in your core set. So there's also 4 more that are going to come with the Corellian conflict, but we're not going to talk about those right now. I just want to talk about the basic ones. Kind of talk to you about like when, as second player, you should include this one in your list of cards, and as first player, when you may want to pick this one if the other player has it, and when you may not want to. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. Our first card is Advanced Gunnery. So Advanced Gunnery is basically gives you gunnery teams, right? But a super special version of gunnery teams. And if you're the second player, it allows you to attack the same ship twice, which is something gunnery teams specifically does not allow you to do. But the problem is it also gives benefit to the first player in that they also get gunnery teams on a ship of their choice, except it's a slightly modified version of gunnery teams. They can't attack the same hull zone twice. So in theory, you can actually attack the same ship twice if you're first player. You just have to have the different hull zones available, which is definitely possible. So I would say it's better than actually having gunnery teams. And also it doubles the fleet point cost of the objective ship. So when do you want this objective card in your deck? Well, it's not the most commonly picked because a lot of times you're going to want to set, like, if you're a second player and you're thinking of putting this in, you're going to want a big ship that has that can maximize that secondary attack, or that second attack from the same arc. So like maybe an Imperial Star Destroyer or a Liberty MC-80 with spinal armament. But the problem is, like, those type of ships tend to take gunnery teams as their weapons team. So, and gunnery teams specifically won't stack with this because whenever there's a rule and conflicts with another rule, whatever says you cannot do something trumps it. And gunnery teams says you cannot attack the same ship twice. So even though this one says you can, the cannot has to trump the can, and that was actually in an early FAQ. So generally, most people will put gunnery teams on a ship, and you don't want to just specifically leave gunnery teams off of your ISD, just because you have this in your deck, because your opponent just won't pick that. It won't pick this, and then you're like, oh well, there went my plan. So the idea here is, if you're going to pick this, maybe you have an ISD that has boarding parties on board, and therefore you can't pick a gunnery team. Or maybe you're picking a ship that doesn't have a weapons team. The Home 1 style MC-80s are actually really great for this, especially if you're running an Akbar build, because now you can declare Akbar, shoot out of the side twice, and this is a ship that doesn't have weapons teams. So like a lot of early Akbar builds would have used this. I used to use this with Akbar builds. So I think it's good for things like that. Basically, ships that have a really, really massive, very, very, very powerful arc that, for whatever reason, don't have gunnery teams, is usually when you would want to pick this and put this in your objectives. Now, as the first player, if you see this one, a lot of times you're going to pass right by it, because you're going to notice that the other player, they probably have a ship that this is going to work perfectly on. So you need to think very, very hard about how you want to use this as the first player. You are going to have the advantage of being able to shoot first. So if you think that you will be able to kill their objective ship before it can shoot, then by all means. But that's not always the case, because usually this is going to go on a tanky ship. That's another reason why an MC-80 is a good target for advanced gunneries, because it's so tanky. It's not likely to be just killed outright. So the other thing too is you need to make sure that the ship that you're going to put it on, if you're a first player, is also not going to necessarily die quickly because you don't want to double the cost of the ship. You know, you're probably going to lose. If you lose your objective ship, you might just have lost the game, especially if it's an ISD or something like that. So when would I want to take this as first player? If maybe the second player made a mistake and they don't really have a ship that's going to capitalize on this, I don't really want to kind of focus on, taking advantage of players' mistakes, though. I think I want to talk about like even a more serious advantage, though. A more serious advantage might be if you do have, like, let's say, you do have the Akbar fleet that's going to still benefit very well off of it, and you think that you are going to now be able to outfirepower the other person, then that's definitely possible. But generally, this is one you tend to avoid, I think. The other thing is maybe if you have that ISD with boarding parties, like that Avenger with boarding parties, that's certainly a possibility on when you might want to be able to do it. But, or if you're just absolutely certain you have enough firepower to focus down the other person's objective ship, then it's a possibility. But you got to keep in mind, they're going to have the better, the second player is going to have the better option. As a first player, you're not really going to have that good of an option. So, if it just lines up perfectly and you're feeling like, I couldn't take gunnery teams, I just couldn't fit it, I'm going to go for it. Then maybe. So that's advanced gunnery. Next up, Most Wanted. Most Wanted is a very popular red objective right now, and it's remained popular. But one of the reasons it's remained popular is because I think it started out, it wasn't that great, but it's become way better with the inclusion of flotillas. And it's really won games for me that I wouldn't have won without it. This one it makes a tremendous impact. So the key to this card. But what's going to happen is the second player is going to pick two ships. He's going to pick one of the second players and one of the first players. Second player picks both of these ships, and he's going to mark them with objective tokens. And they're like, all right, that's your most wanted ship, and this is my most wanted ship. And throughout the game, anytime one of these ships is attacking a most wanted ship, they get an extra die. Of any color that's already in its attack pool. So probably red. But anything else. Also, if it's already in their attack pool. So extra die when attacking the ship, that's great. You know what? If I've got a whole bunch of CR-90s and you've got an Imperial Star Destroyer, all of my CR-90s, extra die. Turbo laser reroute circuits, forget about it. So Most Wanted is nice for that. But another thing that makes Most Wanted really nice is flotillas. So let's say I am running CR-90s and I have, by the way, a GR-75. Well, I'll make your Imperial Star Destroyer your Most Wanted ship, and I'll just put it on my little Bright Hope over here, which you ain't going to be able to kill anyway. And the idea is it doubles the cost of the Most Wanted ship when it's destroyed also, and that's really what happens, because I've had somebody choose this in error one time, thinking that they were going to be able to pick their own Most Wanted ship, and I'm like, no, it says I get to do it, and they're like, oh, and this was in a tournament, and then they weren't familiar, they misread this card. It was in an earlier tournament. And basically, I chose their ISD, and they would have won the match because they took out most of my stuff, but I went all out trying to kill this ISD, ramming it, everything. And I did, and I got an extra 120 points. So what would have been like what would have been like a 98 point loss for me turned into like a 22 point win, because the extra 120 points I got, still it's only a 6-5, but that just tells you how powerful this one is. Like, certain objectives that are point based can sometimes get you like an extra, 45, 60 points, 80 points is really, really good. 120 points for this objective you can get. It's potentially, it's crazy. And it's usually a safe bet because you can pick their most it's not like that many people are running like all flotillas, right? Well, you can't anymore. You have to have at least one ship to put a commander on. But it's not like that many people are running all CR-90s either. So there's usually at least one slightly more expensive ship that would benefit from you getting all of every attack to their most expensive ship having an extra die. So that's you can put it on their flagship if you want. You just want an extra chance of taking out that commander, no problem. So when is the second player, when are you going to want to choose this and put this in your list? And that's primarily if you've got a flotilla. It's a great idea to put Most Wanted in here. But the thing is, you also do want... Now, this card was errated. Because if you look at it the way it's written, you would think, well, squadrons would also get an extra attack die. So you can't use the ability with squadrons. This was an early errata. You just can't do that. It's only when ships are attacking. So you need two things. You need a throwaway ship. If they do kill it, they only get maybe an extra 18 points for your GR-75 medium transport. But you also need a respectable amount of ship-to-ship firepower. So, for example, several CR-90s would be great. Or several Architons would work really nice. Several Architons and a Gazanti. This would be probably a good one for that. Especially if that flotilla isn't really clutch. I mean, you can do this with non-flotilla. You could probably use Most Wanted with a Hammerhead or something like that too, or maybe a cheap Raider. But really, a Gazanti makes the best. It gives your opponent the least risk, and that's one of the problems with some of these. Some of the red objectives, or some of the objectives in general, is that they can backfire. You can play something that your opponent turns against you. And this one has one of the smallest risks of being turned against you, because if I've got a flotilla, I can always make sure my flotilla is the Most Wanted ship, and I can pick their biggest ship, and I have control. And the only way we could even break even is if we're all running the same point cost of ship. So if I've got a flotilla and they've got they have to have something other than a flotilla, right? So even if all they've got is like a CR-90, I can still just say that, and I'll still get more points. But it's nice. It's very good for that. It's also, it's an incredible deterrent when people have a big ship, and it's one of the things that kind of, I think, hurts like Star Destroyers and other large ships like that, because obviously you're going to go for one of their big ships. It can be a little confusing if they've got like two large ships, or most people don't run three. But if they have two large ships, you might be like, well, which one do I go for? And that'll lead to an interesting game. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just got to focus fire on the objective ship, and of course that other player will probably try to put the other large ship in front of it, so kind of force you to split up your fire. Which leads me to, as first player, when do you want to take this ship? Generally, if I'm a first player and I've got all the same ship, I can easily afford to take Most Wanted. It might not be my first choice. It's going to kind of depend on what I think is going to do the most damage to me overall. But if I've got all the same type, if I'm running like one of my Architons lists and I'm running all Architons, then sure, whichever one, I can just line them all up in a row, and whichever one you choose, I can kind of not, I can steer that one kind of away from the pack and kind of tempt you to come in and make it more difficult for you to get it. So that's one thing you can consider. So maybe if you're running all of the same type of ship, your opponent's more likely to pick the wrong one and make a mistake. If your opponent, if I'm first player and you're second player, and maybe you don't have a flotilla, maybe you only have like assault frigates and higher. Well, then maybe I will go with Most Wanted, because if you do the math on the table and it looks like their cheapest ship is more expensive than your most expensive ship, which is extremely unlikely, because hopefully they wouldn't actually include this. That would be really poor decision making on their part. But then it's mathematically in your favor to go for Most Wanted. But that's what you have to, basically the calculation as a first player, and you see this card is my most expensive ship, which will be double value, worth it? Because a lot of times in games with Most Wanted, each player takes out the other player's objective ship because they're getting extra dice every time they attack it. So you gotta expect that both of you are going to kill the other person's Most Wanted ship, and you have to think, is that going to end up in my favor? And most of the time it doesn't, because the second player gets to make those decisions. So you have to say, is my most expensive ship worth it compared to their least expensive ship? And the only way that would happen is if somebody ran like triple ISDs, and then you had like small ships or something like that. But that that if they were running that, they wouldn't use Most Wanted. So basically, usually with the first player you want to skip on this one. Although if you are running a CR90 swarm or an Architon swarm or something like that, it's a possibility. If you've got all really, really cheap ships, you might be able to get away with picking Most Wanted. All right, next up, Opening Salvo. Opening Salvo is one of my favorite in the whole game because I do like to run lots of ships. So this is going to give everybody, every ship is going to start with an objective token. The first time it attacks another ship, it gets to add, if you're second player, you get to add 2 dice of any color. Each of them of any color. So you can add like a black and a blue if you want, or 2 black, or a red and a blue, to their attack pool. And which is nice because if you have Concentrate Fire, you can do that first. I'm like, oh, I've already got 2 black in my attack pool. Now I'm going to add a 3rd black for Concentrate Fire. Always nice. But if you're first player, though, this is a double-edged sword because if you're first player, you also get the same thing, except you only get to add 2 red dice to your attack pool, which in some cases is fine. Red dice do have a double hit side, so there is that. So when do you use this one? And also ships that still have some damage on them at the end of the game but haven't been destroyed. If they got damage cards, you get half the value for them. So it also gives more points, which can be a little bit more hurtful for like tanky ships that are counting on not being able to be destroyed. Well, I'll still get points for them. It also gives you some strategy, like if it's turn 5, you know what? If I hit him one more time, I can just fly away. I'll survive, but he'll have the damage card on him. So you can plan things like that out as well. So when should you include Opening Salvo? Well, this one's very simple. If you've got a lot of ships, and they have to be shooting ships. So if you got like GR75 medium transports, they're not even going to get to make the shot in the first place. So they won't even be able to spend their objective tokens. So I don't recommend using this if you're running a lot of non-shooting flotillas. And it's also important to note that the first time you shoot, you have to spend your token and add those dice. Or you don't have to add the dice, but you do have to spend the token. So you can possibly find yourself in a situation where you opt not to shoot. I give the example of maybe I'm facing an Imperial player. They have a Gozanti with Minister Tua and electronic countermeasures. So they're in a position they can scatter no matter what I do. And then maybe they fly that one in forward, and I'm like, oh, well, I have a shot on you. Well, I don't want to waste it. I don't want to waste my CR90's front shot with turbo laser reroute circuits. I don't want to waste that on you now because no matter what I do, even if I roll great and I have 8 damage showing from this attack, you can just scatter it. Even if I get the accuracy and 6 damage, you can still scatter it. Even if I get 2 accuracy, you can still scatter it. So, there might be times where I don't want to waste it. So you'll just maybe decline to shoot altogether, or maybe you're saving it for like the big threat, and you want all your big attacks to go on the one ship. There have been times while using Opening Salvo that I have opted not to shoot. It's very, very rare because usually it's always better to take a shot than to not take a shot. But if it's like a ship that's no threat to you at all, like a throwaway flotilla without any squadrons to even support, that's there just to be an activation, sometimes you're like, I don't know if I really want to waste Opening Salvo on this throwaway flotilla that may end up scattering it anyway. So sometimes you might not shoot, but it's important to note that you have to spend the token the first time you attack a ship. Not your first opportunity to attack, but the first time you attack. So if you don't want to spend the token, just say, I choose not to attack. So you can do that. So when should you include this? All right. Lots of ships. I will run this one if I'm running Architons. I'd say if you have more than 4, absolutely, this is a great choice. If you're running a lot of ships that have some dice mitigation, potentially it helps because you're getting a lot of extra dice. You don't necessarily want those to go to waste. So I like this one with Vader. I like this one with turbo laser reroute circuits. I like this one. I could see it being used with Leia or anybody who can give you extra rerolls. Tarkin's a possibility. A lot of things, or ordnance experts, because if you're second player, you want to include this one, right? Because now you can roll black dice at long range. So another thing that's really, really good for this one is if you are running those black crits, so assault proton torpedoes, things like that. Black crit effects will work really nice with this because it gives you extra black dice. You can do them at long range as well as at close range, so that's also very nice. And being able to do that is there's not a whole lot of ways to roll black dice at long range in this game. There are a few, and this is one of them. This is a very, very powerful way to do that. So, if you're running special crits that require specific colors of dice and you're a second player, then this is a nice one to include in your deck as well. But yeah, I would say black crits and also high activation, high number of shooting ships are two main reasons you would want to use this. But like I said, beware, because the first player can potentially turn this one around on you. If you are the first player, and let's say you also have a high number of ships, then this is oftentimes actually a really good one to choose. I will almost always choose opening salvo if I'm running, even 4 ships. Sometimes I'll still choose it, but usually I choose it if it's more than 4. If you have like 3 or less ships in your first player, you want to probably pass on this one because it's going to end up doing more damage to you. Because usually if you see this one, that means your opponent's running like 5 ships probably or more. So if you're first player, you have to think about that. But there's some other reasons why you might want to actually take this if you're first player. Like I said, dice mitigation. Now, you're only going to get red dice as first player, but sometimes that's a good thing. If you're an Imperial player and you're running Vader, that's great because now those dice are way more likely to be what you want them to be. If you're running any type of ships that are running turbolaser reroute circuits, those red dice are actually exactly what you want, so that's good. There are a lot of little things like that if you have dice mitigation for those extra dice, because what you really don't want to see happen is just say, all right, I can attack, here's my extra 2 red dice, and they're both blank, and you're like, home 1, if you have a home 1 in your build, that's a possibility, although generally, if you're running home 1, you probably don't have that many ships. So a home 1 is a harder one to do, but there is, like, I recently ran a home 1 with 3, an Akbar home 1 with 3 assault frigates. It had hardly any squadrons, but that one, it was 4 total ships. I could have possibly seen taken opening salvo there because we do have the home 1, we do have Akbar 2, so it would have made some really, really big shots, and we also have that accuracy that's guaranteed. So while I can't mitigate all of the dice, I can mitigate my opponent bracing against those attacks. So, or hopefully I can mitigate my opponent bracing against the attacks. So, that's, I would potentially do that. Choose that as if I were first player. I could see choosing opening salvo, but I wouldn't do it if 4 is kind of like the bare minimum. Yeah, but you will also, another thing, if you're a first player and you choose opening salvo, at the beginning of each round when you're picking your first ship to activate, I would also try to prioritize going after your opponent's ships that still have objective tokens on them that haven't shot yet. Because in those cases, like if you think there's a chance you can kill it, maybe do it. Because for one, not only if you're able to kill it, not only are you taking out an activation, but you're also stopping them from getting an extra 2 black dice, which probably synergize with whatever else they're have going on. So yeah, nothing stings worse than taking out one of somebody's objective ships that have a token before they can even shoot. So that's one of the things you want to prioritize if you're first player also and you choose opening salvo. On to our 4th and final of the original red is Precision Strike. So Precision Strike, I think, is one of the most basic of, kind of the most straightforward ones. And Precision Strike is all about emphasizing bomber-based fleets. But if you look a little closer, you'll realize you don't have to actually use bombers. So this one actually has one of the... There's so much I want to say about this one. I'm going to start at the top, actually. So it has one of the smallest benefits to the second player of any objective, in that it just gives the second player, only thing the second player gets is concentrate fire tokens. So, like, if you're running Garm Bel Iblis, you get no benefit from this, right? Because you're not going to be able to take that token. Because you're going to be maxed out on tokens, right? So, so I don't, well, potentially, I mean, like, there's one ship in the Rebel fleet right now that can potentially take Garm and also get this token. But when a squadron with bomber is attacking, they can, or a ship is attacking, so it doesn't just have to be bombers. This can work with ships as well, so you have to keep that in mind as your opponent is going to have ships, so they're going to be able to potentially get victory points also. They can spend a die with a hit to flip a random face down damage card face up, or or if they just deal a face-up damage, they get a victory token. So there can be a lot of victory tokens being handed out here. A lot of victory points. So when do you want to choose this one? Well, I usually don't choose this one because this is one that your opponent can use against you just as bad, and you're going to probably run into some bomber fleets, especially if you go to a tournament and you're going to play multiple games. But if I'm running a very, very, very heavy bomber fleet, like lots of bombers, like if it's rebels, I'm probably doing probably not as many B-wings, but probably a lot of Y-wings. You also need to make sure that your bombers are going to be able to shoot at the enemy ship. So I need to make sure I'd have intel. I need to make sure I have other support to make those bombers maximize their attacks. So bomber command center, we're going to need stuff like that. Might not be a bad idea to have a Yavaris out there so those bombers can double tap. All things like that to make sure your bombers can actually shoot. Those are good things. I would definitely suggest. If you have a really, really heavy bomber build, and I'm talking not just like 3 bombers, but, like maybe 6 or more bombers, then maybe you want to go for this one. And also it helps if your ships are, able, can shoot well and can get some of that damage on there as well. However, it's not just about ships. It's also about, really actively maximizing your bombers. You're also going to need anti-squadron support because you don't want the other person's TIE fighters, whatever, coming in and blowing up all of your bombers. So you need to have kind of a balanced fleet, and it can be a tricky one to really capitalize on this one. So, that's what I have to say about that. It's you definitely need to have a lot of bombers to make this one really work. I don't think it's worth it if you just have, maybe like 2 or 3 bombers and a couple of ships that are attacking, because I just don't think it's all that great. It also can be nice if you have Dodonna as your commander, because if you get maybe you get that first crit on a ship and it does something awesome, and then you flip it face down. Now you have the option to flip it face up again and do something awesome again. There's always, that's a nice little piece of synergy there. But that only would work if the ship only has a single damage card on it, and and you do exactly 1 damage. So you're spending the die. So it's not really, I wouldn't do it specifically for Dodonna, but Dodonna also happens to work well with bomber fleets because of his natural ability. So generally, pick this if you got a lot of bombers. Now, when do you choose this as first player? Well, this is pretty simple. You need to look at what your opponent has first, and if you happen to have more bombers than them, like let's say they went with all B-wings, okay, and maybe they don't have intel. So they was like, I'm just going to run a whole bunch of B-wings. Well, if you've got some TIE fighters that can lock up their B-wings, and then you've got intel and like 6 or 7 TIE bombers of your own, well, then it might look like, hey, I can totally capitalize on this. Because the good thing about picking this as first player, even if it's going to be even, this gives the second player no real discernible advantage. I mean, a concentrate fire token right now doesn't mean a whole lot. If they start adding stuff in the future that makes concentrate fire tokens better, maybe that that focus firepower, upgrade that's coming out in Wave 7, maybe that will help make this one a little bit better. I don't know. But, this really doesn't give the second player much of an advantage. The only real natural advantage that second player has beyond this little token is the fact that they have built their fleet. So hopefully the second player has built, if they're including this, they've built their fleet with a lot of bombers and a lot of support for those bombers in mind. If you're a first player and you have this in your build as well, or if you're running a very, very heavy bomber build, you may want to choose this one if you're confident after surveying the other person's list that you can out-bomb them. But generally I don't pick this one, because when somebody uses this, they can out-bomb me, because I don't always build bomber fleets. I usually, if I'm doing squadrons, a lot of times it's kind of balanced. I have maybe 2 bombers, and then some intel, and then some escorts, and then some regular long-range intercept fighters, and or I'm going bare bones and I have 2 Z95s, or sometimes no squadrons. Although I don't really do 0 squadrons too much anymore. That would be That'd be crucial. You definitely don't pick this if you don't have very many squadrons. I don't care how much you think your ships are going to be able to score points here. You are going to get annihilated. And even if you do better than the other player, they're probably going to have so many more victory tokens. You'll be like, I'm up by 100 points. No, actually, you lost by 50. So that can totally happen. And you definitely don't want to think you're ahead and then lose on the points because you picked the wrong objective. All right, guys. Well, that's those are the basic reds. We're going to be covering all of the objective cards for the initial, for the core set. So stay tuned for the next installment, which will be coming up here shortly. Also, make sure you've already subscribed if you haven't. This giveaway is still going on right now. Only thing you need to do to enter is to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. So real easy to enter. You might just win. And stay tuned for the winners of the painting contest, which are going to be announced pretty soon, so that's exciting. I'm going to showcase some of the best work here before I announce the winner too. So I've got a lot, and there's still time to get your painting submissions in as well. So head over to crabbok.com, go to the forums there, sign up. Put some more paintings, and even if you're not entering, sign up and go over there and check them out because there's all kinds of great submissions. Some of these things are actually blowing me away. They're really good. And that's about it, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.